All right. Well, hey, good morning. I am excited to really just jump right in today to what we're talking about. Last week, if you were here, if you watched online, you maybe remember we started a new series last week, and we're going through this book in the Old Testament part of the Bible. It's called Judges, and the book of Judges, it's mostly like a narrative. It reads like a story. It's a narrative about a time in ancient Israel's history, in between the time when they moved into the promised land that God had promised them. They moved into it under the leadership of a guy named Joshua. And so it's in between then and the time of a monarchy, when they kind of instituted kingship and had one ruler over them. It's this period of the book of Judges. This period, it covers a period of about 330 years, where the 12 tribes of Israel, they lived kind of like, similar to like the original 13 colonies, whereas it's these group of people groups with common ancestry. They have common language, common customs, but really no central government. They're lived as 12 distinct tribes, and they had no king because they were supposed to view God as their king. Like he was supposed to be the one in charge, and he gave them his law, and so they were supposed to live under this law. And that's the way that it was supposed to go. The closest thing they had to any kind of government was these judges, and that's where the book's name comes from, Judges. There were these judges, but they weren't actually kings. They were more like, they didn't have any real authority. They just kind of had, the little authority they had was basically just to distribute the law to all the different tribes and to make sure that they're kind of following it. And then sometimes they would deliver the people from outside oppressors. Like if an outside nation came in and started oppressing the nation, sometimes they would deliver them from them. And so that's kind of what's going on throughout the period of Judges. And over and over and over, you see it happen. Before too long, the people, they abandoned God's law because they had something in common with you. They don't like to be told what to do. Right? And that's what they would do. And so throughout the book of Judges, you see this cycle and this pattern emerge. And over and over and over, the people would rebel against God. And so God would allow some other nation to come in and to occupy them or to oppress them in some way. And they didn't like that. So then they'd cry out to God for help. We're so sorry. Please help us. And so then he would send a deliverer. He would send a judge, somebody who would kind of solve their problem. And then they'd live at peace again for a while until the next time that they rebelled against God, and then the whole cycle started again. And so Judges is about this nation of Israel that did this for over 300 years. It's just this never-ending cycle. They got in trouble, they got delivered. They got in trouble, they got delivered over and over and over, which sounds a lot like our lives, right? Like we don't like to be told what to do. And we live in a culture that says that you should have it your way. That things should be the way you want them to be. And we internalize that message, and it tends to come out of us a little bit more like this. And we talked about this last week. We say, I want to do what I want, when I want, with whom I want. And that's the dream, right? To live your life, to be able to do what you want, when you want, with whom you want. But we also know, because we're like civilized people, and we know we can't really do anything that we want. We know there's got to be some kind of limits. And so we add that one little condition on the end. I want to do what I want, when I want, with whom I want, as long as it doesn't hurt anybody. Now, there's a lot of problems with that idea. There's a lot of problems with living that way, and we'll talk about a lot of those things as we go through the book of Judges. Last week, we looked at the beginning of the book, and we talked about this idea that maximum freedom is found only under God's authority. And remember, if you remember this, we said that you and I were created to be ruled, and when we refuse God as our king, we always end up serving something else. Basically, all we do is we trade one king for another. And so this week, we're actually skipping all the way to the end of the book of Judges. Because we think that when we look at the book of Judges, the beginning and the end kind of serve as bookends that give us two different looks at the same idea. The idea of, I want to live, or I want to do what I want, when I want, with whom I want, as long as it doesn't hurt anybody. That the beginning and the end of the book of Judges kind of give us two different takes on that idea. See, we talked about last week how that idea is pretty deceptive, that living that way does not actually offer the freedom that it seems like it would. But what we're talking about this week And the story that we're looking at this week, this shows that this kind of thinking, this I want to do what I want when I want, that it's actually really dangerous. See, at the very end of the book of Judges, there's this very long, very complicated story that we're going to walk through today. And because it's long and complicated, I'm going to try to make it simple. And so we're not going to read through the entire thing because it's 3 chapters long. But I'm going to kind of summarize it and hit the highlights as we go through. Because the book of Judges, it ends with this crazy story that reflects just how bad things had gotten for Israel. And honestly, it reflects what happens when an individual or a group of people or maybe even a nation, this story reflects what happens when we decide, I'm going to do what I want to do. And I'm going to do what I think is right, and you do what you think is right. And you don't get to tell me what's right, because what's right for you might not be right for me. And so just mind your own business. Like that's what we're going to be talking about today, because that's exactly what Israel did over and over and over. And so in this story, you're going to see the whole thing just devolves into this horrible cesspool of a story. The story we're looking at today is maybe the most disturbing story in all of ancient literature, and it certainly is the most disturbing story in the Bible. So if you want to follow along, or if you want to read the story as we're talking about it, you find it in Judges. It begins in chapter 19, goes through the end of the book in chapter 21. But like I said, I'm going to summarize most of it, but we'll kind of zoom in on a couple parts as we go. So here's how it starts out. There is this Levite. He's called a Levite because he's from the tribe of Levi. He's living, though, in the land of Ephraim, which is for another tribe. So he's a Levite living in this one tribal area. It's way up in the northern part of the country. And he gets himself a girlfriend, and really not a girlfriend, calls her a concubine. A concubine in the ancient world is kind of like a weird combination of girlfriend slash servant slash wife slash fill in the blank with almost anything that you want. It was this weird kind of arrangement. It's kind of a legal thing, kind of not legal, but no matter what it was definitely against Israelite tradition and teaching. This was something that they were not supposed to do. Matter of fact, this idea of taking a concubine was one of the things that they had adopted from the Canaanites, from the surrounding culture that they weren't supposed to be like. And so he gets himself this concubine. He lives up north. She's from down south, but she comes up to live with him. And then eventually, she for whatever reason, she runs away. She runs away from home, goes back home, moves in with her dad. And that Levite must not have been too upset, because he waits 4 months. And then finally, at the end of 4 months, he's like, okay, I'm going to go get her. And so he travels down south to where her family's from, shows up at her dad's door, and basically says, hey, I've come for my woman. And so his father-in-law, concubine-in-law, I don't know what you call him. We don't really know that they were actually married. Maybe they were, maybe not. We're not sure. It's a weird arrangement. So the father-in-law, he's not excited about this. And so he decides that he's going to keep them there as long as possible. So what he does is they just kind of sit down for the evening and they just start drinking. And he gets the Levite really, really drunk, so that the next morning he's hung over and just can't see straight. And so by the time the afternoon rolls around, they haven't left yet. They haven't gotten on the road, and the Levite gets to a place where he's finally like, okay, I'm able to understand what's going on in the world right now. We need to get going. And the father's like, oh, no, it's too late. You waited too long. If you leave now, you're never going to make it in time. You got to stay another night. And so that night, he does the same thing, gets him drunk again. And the next morning, the guy's hungover. He waits till the afternoon when he wants to leave. The father's like, oh, no, it's too late. You got to stay again. And he does this over and over and over for several days, until finally, eventually, the Levite is just like, no, we got to go. Like, we've been here too long. We got to go. So even though it's late afternoon, they set out, they leave on the journey, and they start heading home. They load everything up, and they start heading back north to go home. But they left so late in the day that they don't make it all the way, and so they have to stop for the night. And they stop in this town called Gibeah. Now, Gibeah was a town that belonged to the tribe of Benjamin. And they get to the town of Gibeah. They go to the town square, which is kind of what you were supposed to do. The laws of hospitality in that culture at the time said that basically if you showed up in a town and you needed a place to stay, like these were small towns. They didn't have like hotels and the inns and things like that. But if you showed up in a town and you needed a place to stay, you were supposed to go to the town square and just wait by the well. That every town had a well at the center of it. So if you went to the town to the well and you just stayed in the town square, eventually some of the people coming to get water, they would offer you to come to their home and to stay with them. And that's the way that it was supposed to work. And so they go to the town square and nobody offers to take them in. Like they're just there waiting, and there's people coming and going, and nobody is offering for them to come stay with them, which is really, really strange. Like hospitality was a high value in that culture. Somebody would have offered, but nobody does. And so eventually, this old guy comes up, and he introduces himself. They get to talking a little bit. And he says, "Where are you from?" And he goes, "Oh, we're from up north." "Oh, me too. That's amazing." And so they have this kind of connection. So the guy invites him over and says, "You know what? Your concubine, your servant, you guys come over to my house. You can stay with me for the night." And so the Levite, the concubine, the servant, their donkeys, they all go over to this guy's house. That's a lot of details all at once. Everybody good? Like they're still tracking with me? Okay. This is where things get really weird. Judges chapter 19, verse 22. So it's real late at night, and this is what it says. While they were enjoying themselves, some of the wicked men of the city surrounded the house. Pounding on the door, they shouted to the old man who owned the house, "Bring out the man who came to your house so we can have sex with him." Now, that's pretty jarring, right? Like that's jarring, but you need to understand that what they were wanting to do wasn't so much about gratification as it was about humiliation. See, the Canaanite people, oftentimes Canaanite men, if they wanted to humiliate another man, this is how they would do it. They would basically do this to him as a way of demonstrating dominance over another person, or like highlighting that other person's subservience. And it's actually a practice that was pretty common throughout the ancient world, especially when one people group would conquer another people group, is that oftentimes soldiers would do this to their defeated enemies. And so these guys, they're pounding on the door, "Bring this guy out. We don't like strangers. We don't like guests. Nobody invited these people. We want him to leave. And when he leaves, we want him to leave and to tell other people, 'Don't go to Gibeah. They don't like strangers.'" So it's all about humiliating this guy and intimidating him so that they won't have strangers like him coming into their town again. It continues in verse 13. The owner of the house went outside and said to them, "No, my friends, don't be so vile. Since this man is my guest, don't do this outrageous thing. This is against our laws," is basically what he's saying. Like, this is our guest. He's pointing out to them, hey, this high value of hospitality that we all hold, these guys are my guests. We can't be like this. Don't do this. So the homeowner, he's trying to be the good guy. He's trying to protect them. But then the story gets even weirder. Verse 24. "Look, here's my virgin daughter and his concubine. I will bring them out to you now, and you can use them and do to them whatever you wish." But as for this man, don't do such an outrageous thing. Like that's crazy, right? Like you read that and you go, what? How does that even cross someone's mind to offer something like that? That is absolutely bonkers. It's crazy. But it goes on, verse 25. But the men would not listen to him. So the man took his concubine and sent her outside to them, and I'm not even going to finish the verse. If you want to read it on your own, go for it. But honestly, it's too horrible. When they finally let her go, she stumbles back to the house and she collapses at the front door. In the morning, the Levite, he opens the door and she's laying there, and he says to her just really gruffly, "Get up, let's go." Like that's all the scripture records. It's just, "Get up, let's go." She doesn't answer. So he grabs her and he loads her onto one of the donkeys, and they head home. At this point in the story, we don't know if she's alive or not. We just don't. He gets home. He is so angry. He decides this is not right. Something's got to be done about this. So he writes a letter. He writes a letter to all of the community leaders of all the other 12 tribes, and he outlines this story of what went down that night. And he hires some servants to deliver the letter to all 12 of the tribes. And just before he sends it out, he thinks to himself, wait a minute, nobody's going to do anything about this because a letter is not a big deal. Like, nobody knows who I am. And then he gets an idea. I know what'll get their attention. And he chops her body up into 12 pieces. And he attaches a different body part to each of the letters and sends them out all over the nation of Israel. A few days later, the leaders of all the tribes, mail comes in. Hey, you've got a package. They see the body part. They read the letter that explains this horrible thing that had happened, and rightly so, the nation is outraged. They are upset. They are livid, and so they decide, we're going to get together, and we're going to talk about what needs to be done because of this. So they all gather together. Verse 30, it records it. It says, everyone who saw it was saying to one another, such a thing has never been seen or done, not since the day the Israelites came up out of Egypt. Just imagine, we must do something. So speak up. They even recognize, whoa, this is a new low. We have never allowed something like this to happen in our nation. We've got to do something. So they all decide that they're gonna get together, they're gonna bring out an army, and they're gonna march down to Gibeah, and they're gonna show up and surround the city, and they're gonna demand justice. Basically, hey, bring out the perpetrators so that we can deal justice with them. And so all the civic leaders, they gather in a town called Mizpah. And they all make this oath together. They all agree, you know what, no matter what happens, we will never allow any of our daughters to ever marry a Benjamite. Again, Benjamin was the tribe that the town of Gibeah belonged to. We're never going to allow our daughters to marry them. So then they go and they march outside of the city of Gibeah. And they demand that the Benjamites turn over the perpetrators. But Benjamin got a letter too. And so they kind of knew that something was going to be coming, that something would happen. And so they basically say, no, we don't have to do this. And they line up their own army. And they say, we don't have to give you the perpetrators because there's not been any kind of trial yet. And even if there was going to be a trial, these are Benjamites, means we judge ourselves. You don't get to tell us what to do. And so eventually the two sides, they go to battle. On day one of the battle, the Benjamites just clean house. They are beaten up on those other 11 tribes like crazy. They kill tens of thousands of people. Second day of the battle, same thing. Benjamin kills tens of thousands of Israelites. By day 3, Israel finally is like, hey, maybe we need a strategy. So they come up with this idea. And they say, you know what, we'll start fighting, and then we'll pretend like we're losing, and we'll start running away. And when the Benjamites leave the city to pursue us, then we'll send in another group of people to go attack the city behind them. So that's exactly what they do. They run away. The Benjamites, the army chases after them. They send another group into the city, and they burn the city. And they go in and they kill everybody. I mean, women, children, animals, everybody until the whole, and they don't just stop there. Like they burn the city of Gibeah, but then they go on like a little rampage and they go to every single town throughout the tribe of Benjamin doing the same thing, burning it to the ground and killing everybody. Until the whole region is just like this smoldering wasteland. The original army that had stood outside of Gibeah to defend themselves, about 600 of them, they got away. They escaped to the desert, and they stayed out there for like 4 months because they were just terrified to come back, not knowing what would happen to them. So a few weeks go by. All the emotion, all the bloodlust, all the adrenaline kind of dies down, and it finally dawns on those elders of the leaders of the tribes of Israel, oh no. What have we done? Like we just wiped out an entire tribe of Israel. And so they feel terrible. They begin to repent. They begin to cry out to God, oh, we're so sorry. Like, how could we allow something like this to happen? And then somebody has an idea. They said, well, you know what? Benjamin's not all gone. There were like those 600 soldiers that escaped. They're still there. And so somebody else says, yeah, but the problem is that like they're all male. And so they don't have any wives, and so they're not going to be able to like repopulate the tribe of Benjamin. Now, what are we going to do? Because all of us, we made an oath that we would never let our daughters marry them. So what are we supposed to do? Somebody else says, I got an idea. Were there any cities throughout Israel that when we called everybody together to respond to this horrible thing, were there any cities that didn't show up? Did any cities that were like, you know what, I'm not going to be a part of that? And somebody said, yeah, I didn't ever see anybody from Jabesh Gilead there. And so they kind of did a straw poll. Yeah, was Jabesh Gilead here? Did they have a representative here? Everybody's like, no, I have no idea. They weren't here. So they say, okay. Well, then they didn't take the oath. So I got an idea. Let's do this. And so they send a smaller army to Jabesh Gilead. Judges 21 verse 10 says this is what they did. So the assembly sent 12,000 fighting men with instructions to go to Jabesh Gilead and to put to the sword those who were living there, including the women and children, their own people, women and children. And that sounds crazy, but they don't kill quite all of the women and children. Look at verse 11. This is what you are to do, they said. Kill every male and every woman who is not a virgin. So kill everyone except for the young virgins, and then we're going to take those girls and we'll give them to the 600 Benjamites to be their wives so that we don't completely annihilate the tribe of Benjamin. We're going to save them. You should read your Bible. Like, this is a fascinating story, sickening story, but it's one of those things that you don't always realize is there until you dig through it. And so they do it again. They go to Jabesh Gilead. They wipe everybody out except for the young ladies. Verse 12, they found among the people living in Jabesh Gilead 400 young women who had never slept with a man, and they took them to the camp at Shiloh in Canaan. So they take the girls to the 600 Benjamites, and they show up and they say, hey, we've got good news and bad news. Bad news, we killed all your relatives, we burned down all your towns, but good news is we brought you some ladies who we think will be your wives. We don't really know if this is going to be a compliant thing or not. We're not really worried about that, but we brought some women for you to be your wives. A little bit more bad news, though. There's 600 of you. There's only about 400 of them, so not everybody gets a new wife until someone else speaks up. Hey, I've got an idea. In a few days, we're up here by the city of Shiloh. In a few days, there's going to be a festival in Shiloh. And as part of that festival, every year the young ladies come outside and they do this dance in the field. So let's just have everybody who, like, all the people who lost out on the wife lottery, all the people that didn't get one, let's have them hide in the woods. And when the young ladies come out to do their dance, everybody who missed out on getting a wife, you can run out and kidnap one of them and take them back with you, and that'll be your wife. And then when those girls that were kidnapping, when their dads get upset and they come out and they say, hey, what about that oath we all took? We can say, look, just do us all a solid and let them keep your daughters. Because technically, you didn't give your daughters to them. They were taken. And so you're in the clear. You always know anytime you begin to hear someone start to justify something by saying, oh, technically, you don't have to. You usually know that somebody in that situation is doing what they want when they want. And that's exactly what happens. They hide in the woods. They grab their wives. They all head back to this smoldering wasteland of Benjamin to begin repopulating. And that's how the book of Judges ends. Like, that's it. That's the end. There is no heroes, nothing good at all. You see, some of you were raised in a Christian home where maybe your parents would sometimes read a Bible story to you at night. They skipped this one, didn't they? Like, they didn't read you that one. You didn't go to bed at night going, Dad, I want to hear the one about the concubine and the chainsaw. Like, tell me that story. You didn't hear that. They were like, no. We're going to listen to a different genocide story. We're going to do Noah's Ark again because that one's got animals. It's better somehow. And so the writer of Judges, he ends things. His final comment in the book of Judges, the very last verse, Judges 21:25. In those days, Israel had no king. God was supposed to be their king, but they say there's no king. Everyone did as they saw fit. There was nobody there to enforce the law of God, nothing to keep the people on a similar agreed-upon path. There's no binding moral consensus, and so the people were left to follow their own moral compass. There was nothing saying this is right and this is wrong, and so people had to do whatever they felt was right. And you see this happen over and over. In this story, this train wreck of a story, if you zero in on any one decision that somebody made in the story, every single time you can see how they were just doing what they thought was right for the situation. But it's when you back out and you look at the whole thing as a whole that you go, this is crazy. When you look at all those right decisions, you just see chaos. I mean, think about it. The men of Gibeah, didn't they have the right to say, well, these people are strangers. We have a right to decide who stays here. Don't we have that right? Yes, we do. And so send that guy out here. We're going to teach him a lesson. This is how we're going to protect our city from strangers. We're going to humiliate this guy to the point that he'll never want to come back. Don't we have that right? Absolutely. Yes, we do. And so they're pounding on the door. And the Levite, honey, if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be in this situation. See, you ran off. Your dad kept getting me drunk. This is your fault. I don't know what's going to happen, but here, just take her. Do what you need to do. Besides, it's just a woman. Like she's just my property, and this is all her fault. So this is the right thing to do. And then after she's brutalized, well, there's got to be justice. And I got to get the people's attention. Can't just write a letter, so I'm going to chop her body up. That'll get people's attention. And then the Benjamites. Well, you can't just haul off our people with no trial. It is the right thing for us to do to defend them. And then Israel in response, well, it's the right thing for us to do to provide wives for the Benjamites. And it's the right thing for us to do to have justice against Jabesh Gilead because they didn't participate in things when we needed their help. See, if you isolate any of those decisions, you can justify it. Everyone did what they thought was right. Literally, in the Hebrew text, if you read it in Hebrew, it says that everyone did what was right in their own eyes, and it was chaotic. And here's why we're talking about all this. It's because there's some of that in you, and there's some of that in me. There's something in me that wants to say, wait, whoa, it's my life. I'm going to do what I want. You manage your life and your family, and you let me manage my life and my family. That what's right for me, even if it's not right for you, I get to do what's right for me. See, we want the freedom to do what we want, when we want, and with whom we want, as long as it doesn't hurt anybody. But there's a lot of problems with that. A lot of problems, least of which is this. Only the super rich people can actually do this. Because eventually, you're going to need a lawyer. Like, if you're really going to live like that, eventually, you're going to have some pretty expensive legal bills to be able to do that. And so the only people you ever hear really advocating for that type of lifestyle are like the entertainment people, the people who make the movies or who sing the songs and do all those things. And we listen to it and we buy it and we go to those movies and we hear it and we go, oh, to be like that. Oh, that would be so cool. Oh, to have that kind of freedom. But in the real world, you don't find people with real life experience preaching that message. Like, you don't ever find an elementary teacher who's sending the kids home at the end of the week saying, remember, children, the key to happiness is to do whatever you want, when you want, with whoever you want. Don't let anyone tell you what to do. You don't ever find a teacher saying that. You don't ever find a DCS worker telling some parents who have had their children removed for them. You don't ever find a DCS worker telling to them, hey, as long as you just figure out how to do what you want, when you want, with whom you want, if you can figure that out, then you'll get your kids back. You don't find any judges or police officers saying this. You don't find people who live on the consequence side of life preaching that message. Because they know that the truth is, you can't do what you want, when you want, with whom you want, without hurting someone. It's impossible. Because if you live that way, eventually, at the very least, you will hurt you. And maybe some of you need to write this down, but you are someone. See, if you do what's right in your own eyes and you end up hurting you, you have hurt someone. And ultimately, like we talked about last week, you will be mastered by something. We talked about it last week, whatever that thing, I don't know what the thing is for you that has mastered you. Maybe it's your debt, maybe it's a relationship, maybe it's an addiction. But whatever that thing was, most likely it started out as an expression of your freedom. But now, you can't do what you want when you want because you're stuck. You hurt you. But it doesn't only hurt you. When you live that way, you hurt the people with you. That's why your parents, when you were a teenager, that's why they always freak out. This is why parents freak out about who their kids hang out with. The kids all the time are like, well, I'm not going to do it. But the parents know, yeah, but if you're with them when they do, you're going to get hurt too. You hurt the people that are with you. But not only that, you hurt the people that care about you. If you're a teenager, you can't possibly hurt you without hurting someone else. If you have a husband or a wife who loves you, you can't possibly hurt only yourself. If you have living parents, you can't possibly only hurt yourself. You can't do what you want when you want, not hurt anybody. And not only do you hurt the people in your life, you hurt the people coming after you. Some of you know this because your parents, at some point, they did what they wanted when they wanted, and they didn't factor you in. And they made a decision or a series of decisions that they didn't think was hurting anyone, but it has hurt you every single year of your life. The idea that we can do what we want when we want without hurting anybody, it is a myth. But even if it wasn't, even if it was possible, why would we aspire to that? Why would we aspire to the bottom of the barrel? Like, why do we set the bar so low that the goal is just not to hurt anybody? Where's the win in that? What's the good that comes out of that? How come we never hear, I want to do what I want, when I want, with whom I want, as long as it helps somebody? Where's that? Why don't we ever hear something like that? Why wouldn't we aspire to greatness? Why wouldn't we try to do as much good as we can instead of trying to get away with as much as we can? Besides all of that, in the end, here's the truth, we're all hypocrites. Like, we all like to think that, you don't tell me what to do, I'm not going to do. But in the end, we end up having to go back to the very people whose rules we violated. You know this because you've experienced it. Dad, don't tell me what to do. Yes, and Dad's like, yeah, don't do this. And you're like, yeah, I know. But yeah, Dad, come on, you're so out of touch. You don't understand. And then you find yourself in trouble, and who do you have to call? Dad? Or your mom. Stay away from him, honey. Stay away from him, honey. Just trust me. Stay away from him. Oh, you don't know what you're talking about. And then all of a sudden, who do you got to call? Mom? See, you end up having to go back to the very person whose rules you abandoned. And the nation of Israel, they experienced this over and over and over. Every single time they turned their back on God. And then they would experience this disaster, and they would turn their eyes back to God and cry out, we need help. And every single time, God, who had been abandoned and embarrassed by his people, and he would, every single time he stepped in and he sent a deliverer. And if who God was then holds true for today, then there's a question we've got to ask ourselves. And I want you to ask this question of yourself. And honestly, I want this question kind of rolling around in the back of your mind as we go through the rest of this series. The question is this: if you were God, how would you respond to a group of people who decided, I'm going to do what I want, when I want, and I don't care what you say? If you were God, and you understood that every man for himself ultimately isolates a man from everybody else, what would you say? What would you do? If God really is a loving Father, how would you expect him to respond to you? Or how would you expect him to respond to me, or to us, or to our nation, or to our culture that increasingly is leaning in the direction of, I have my own moral compass and I'm not interested in yours? We don't have to wonder what he would do. We know. Because just like he did over and over for Israel, he sent a deliverer. But instead of this deliverer saving us from like military oppressors, he saved us from the power of sin and death. That Jesus Christ, he lived the perfect life that we couldn't, and he took the punishment for our sin on the cross to save us from the penalty of sin and death. And his love and his forgiveness is waiting for you, so cry out to him. We're going to finish this morning by singing a song. And this song, it's called Christ Be All Around Me. And as we sing this song, I want you to pay careful attention to the words and really let this song be you crying out to God. Specifically in verse 2, we're going to sing some words, and it says this. It says, as I wait, heart of God, satisfy and sustain. It's a way of saying, God, be enough for me. Help me to just accept that you are enough. Then it'll go on and it'll say, as I hear, voice of God, lead me on, be my guide. Let that be your way of saying, God, I'm tired of doing what I want, when I want, with whom I want. I'm tired of having it my way. All it's brought is pain. So Lord Jesus, have it your way. As we sing this song, if you know that you need to tell somebody about this, because maybe you've come to the point where you've like been here before, you've made this decision before, but you know that you need somebody to help hold you accountable, I would love to talk with you. I'd love to pray with you, to hear your story. But honestly, what I really encourage you to do will be to talk with the person who brought you today. That if you're here with another person after church, on the way home, or when you go to lunch, or whatever you're going to do, talk to them about this so that you have somebody else who can come to you and say, hey, how's it going? And can check in on you and hold you accountable. Because you know how it goes when you try to do it by yourself. As we sing, cry out. That God, have it your way. Let's pray together. Father, we love you. We thank you so much for Jesus. We thank you for the deliverer that you sent for us, to save us from our sin, to save us from the consequences of all of our decisions to walk away from you time and time again. God, thank you for your patience with us. That no matter what, every single time, if we cry out to you genuinely, that you are there to forgive, and you are there to walk alongside us and to point us in a better direction. God, just give us the humility to recognize it. Father, we love you. Thank you for your love and your grace that was poured out for us on the cross in Jesus. Help us to live for you.